The Doctrine of the Buddha from Dölpo by Cyrus Stearns. Chapter 3 in The Buddha from Dölpo, a study of the life and thought of the Tibetan master Dolpopa Sherab Gyaltsen. Existence and nirvana are not identical, but like a shadow and the sun. Bhagavan Avalokiteshvara. The title alone of Dolpopa's great calculation of the doctrine that has the significance of a fourth council would have been enough to rankle those who were opposed to his interpretations of Buddhist doctrine. It was universally accepted in Tibet that there had been 3 great councils in ancient India for the purpose of gathering and accurately preserving the teachings of the Buddha after his final nirvana. Dolpopa's audacious claim that his text served as a 4th such council would obviously have provoked incredulous reactions among many of his contemporaries. That he anticipated certain objections is clear from his comments at the end of the auto-commentary to the 4th Council. By means of this, it is understood that the Buddha's doctrine survives in superior, middling, and inferior forms. The superior is the Krita Yuga Dharma, which is the witness and authority. The middling is the Treta Yuga Dharma, and the inferior is the Dvapara Yuga Dharma. It is crucial that the experts who stand guard over the doctrine realize that those two are not witnesses. To remove the flaws that the flawed minds of individuals have mixed into the flawless doctrine, and the corruptions that they have imposed, and then establish us on the path of perfect view, meditation, and conduct, is also the significance of a council. There were 3 councils in the past, and this is the 4th. It is also a great calculation of the doctrine. It is called impartial and unbiased because all the faithful respect, pure vision, offerings of unyielding advice, appeals, love, compassion, and so forth remain impartial and unbiased, without falling into any partiality. You might ask, while it is known that many arhats gathered for the councils in the past, how many arhats are gathered here? The sublime Krita Yuga Dharma teachings contain many thousands of profound quotes by the great arhat, the Buddha, the Blessed One, which teach the meaning of this with extreme clarity. Those are the same as the great arhat, so they have been gathered according to his tradition. Future compilers, please also do likewise, and if there is disagreement about the interpretation of the quotes, please use the auto-commentaries of the Buddha himself as witnesses. In addition to clarifying the meaning of the title of Dolpopa's text, these remarks also touch on the first major point in the 4th Council itself. In this work and many of his earlier compositions, Dolpopa speaks of a 4-fold division of the Buddhist teachings according to 4 eons, yuga. Based on the teachings of the stainless light, Dolpopa mentions 2 sets of 4 eons. The first set is the greater, referring to the quality of the eons that make up a cosmic age, kalpa, while the lesser set refers to the quality of the different periods of the Buddhist teachings. In the auto-commentary to the 4th Council, he mentions his criteria for this classification and makes it obvious that he is speaking of a doxographical scheme concerning the eons of the doctrine. As Matthew Capstein has noted, Dolpopa was allocating philosophical doctrines to eons according to purely dogmatic criteria. For Dolpopa, the teachings of the perfect Krita Yuga are those that apply directly to the truth just as it is, while the teachings that belong to the Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga are progressively contaminated and filled with flaws because of the nature of the individuals who have composed them. Thus, only the Krita Yuga teachings should be regarded as valid testimonies to the enlightened intent of the Buddha. This classification of the historical degeneration of the Buddhist teachings is indeed found in the Stainless Light, primarily in the section of commentary on verses 22 to 23 of the chapter on the worldly realm, Loka Dhatu Patala, of the Kala Chakra Tantra. But it is less clear what the Stainless Light and Dolpopa both accept as the teachings of the Krita Yuga. As indicated by quotations throughout his writings, Dolpopa certainly considers the Krita Yuga Dharma to include the highest tantras, the trilogy of Bodhisattva commentaries, the 10 sutras on the essence, the 10 sutras of definitive meaning, and the works of Maitreya, Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Asanga, Naropa, and Saraha. He seems to consider Arya Vimuktisena, Haribhadra, Yashomitra, and other late Indian masters to represent the Treta Yuga. In the translations of the 4th Council and the auto-commentary in Part 2, it will be obvious that Dolpopa identifies his own tradition with the teachings of those scriptures and writers he views as truly portraying the Krita Yuga tradition. The restoration of the Krita Yuga teachings is thus a prime motive behind his wish to redefine what had until his time been accepted as orthodox lines of scriptural interpretation in Tibet. 1. Emptiness of self-nature and emptiness of other. The key in Dolpopa's approach is to link his view of the absolute as empty only of other relative phenomena, shentong, to the teachings of the Krita Yuga, as opposed to the teachings of the Treta Yuga and other eons that emphasize even absolute reality is empty of self-nature, rangtong. This he makes clear early in the Fourth Council. Fully understanding each of those divisions, I wish to purge the doctrine, and wishing for myself and others to enter the fine path, I honor the sublime Krita Yuga Dharma as the witness. The Treta Yuga and later eons are flawed, and their treatises that have been diluted like milk in the market are in every case unfit to act as witnesses. The higher refute the lower, as the higher philosophical tenets refute the lower. The Krita Yuga Dharma is the stainless words of the conqueror, and what is carefully taught by the lords on the 10th level and by the great system founders, flawless and endowed with sublime qualities. In that tradition, all is not empty of self-nature. Carefully distinguishing empty of self-nature and empty of other, what is relative is all taught to be empty of self-nature, and what is absolute is taught to be precisely empty of other. Dolpopa speaks of two modes of emptiness that correspond to the two truths and to phenomena and the true nature of reality. He emphasizes that absolute truth is not empty of itself, but is the basis or ground empty of all other relative phenomena, described as the profound emptiness of other. This is the mode of emptiness for the true nature of reality. Absolute truth is uncreated and indestructible, unconditioned and beyond the chain of dependent origination. Relative truth and ordinary phenomena are empty of self-nature and completely unestablished. The relative is the created and destructible phenomena that are conditioned and dependent on causes and circumstances. One of the central themes of Dolpopa's work is to correctly distinguish the meaning of the term emptiness when referring to the incidental stains that veil the Buddha nature, or sugata essence, and when referring to the Buddha nature itself. Both are empty, but not in the same way. Dolpopa clarifies this point in a text addressed to one of the rulers of Zhang. Because all that is present as the two modes of emptiness are equal in being emptiness, there are statements with the single phrase, all is emptiness. But there are also statements that distinguish between empty of self-nature and empty of other, so their intent should also be precisely presented. Concerning that, because relative and incidental entities are completely non-existent in their true mode of existence, they are empty of own existence. That is being empty of self-nature. Because the original absolute that is empty of those relative phenomena is never non-existent, it is empty of other. Dolpopa considers the Buddha nature or sugata essence to be natural luminosity, which is synonymous with the Dharmakaya, and a primordial, indestructible, eternal, great bliss inherently present in every living being. On the other hand, the incidental stains or impurities that veil the Buddha nature are the various states of mind associated with the infinite experiences of mundane existence. While the veils of temporary affliction are empty of self-nature, the Buddha nature is empty only of phenomena other than itself. When discussing these topics, Dolpopa often employs the threefold paradigm of the basis or ground, the path, and the result or fruit of enlightenment. Using this approach, he would first say the Buddha nature is a primordial awareness that is the universal ground or basis, kunshi yeshe, for all phenomena experienced in samsara and nirvana. He is careful to emphasize that this luminous, enlightened space inherent in the mind stream of each living being is not the cause of samsara, but that even samsara would be impossible without it, and from this point of view only is it referred to as the ground of samsara. It is the basis from which all imperfections and faults are cleansed, and the ground in which all qualities are actualized. Second, the path is the process of erasing all imperfections or faults from that ground or basis, and thus allowing the qualities to actualize or become evident. This path is composed of two aspects. The first is the accumulation of primordial awareness, which burns away all the veils obscuring the qualities of the Dharmakaya that is eternally, spontaneously present in each living being. The second aspect of the path is the accumulation of merit, which gradually creates the previously absent qualities of the form kayas. Third, the result of this process is Buddhahood, the optimum condition in which the greatest good can be achieved for both yourself and others. This is accomplished by the attainment of the separated result, of the Dharmakaya, the absolute state of authentic being from which the obscurations of the afflictions and of knowledge have been separated. This is also accomplished by the attainment of the form kayas, the produced result, which is the relative symbolic manifestations of a Buddha. Most Buddhist teachers in Tibet did not agree with Dolpopa's ideas, and almost nothing is known of his earlier views before coming to Chonang. The following excerpt from his writings focuses on both the opinions of others and what Dolpopa himself had accepted earlier while still living at Sakya. According to the opinions of some scholars in India who are not noble individuals, and also some spiritual friends in Tibet, other than the emptiness of a pillar or a pot and so forth, an emptiness of other does not fit the definition of emptiness. Therefore, only an emptiness of self-nature, in which all phenomena are each empty of own essence, fits the definition of emptiness. There is absolutely no definition of emptiness beyond that. That being the case, as with the emptiness of the relative, the absolute is also empty of the absolute. As phenomena are empty of phenomena, the true nature is also empty of true nature. As samsara is empty of samsara, great nirvana is also empty of great nirvana. As the form kayas are empty of the form kayas, the dharmakaya is also empty of the dharmakaya, and so forth. In brief, there are many opinions in which everything is accepted as empty of self-nature, but in which it is impossible for anything whatsoever not to be empty of self-nature. My mind was also accustomed for a long time to the habitual propensity for such a famous view. I did understand a tiny amount of Dharma, but as long as I had not beheld the great kingdom of the exceptional, profound, uncommon, and sublime Dharma, I also merely relied on the verbal regurgitation of others and said, only an emptiness of self-nature fits the definition of emptiness. There is no definition of emptiness beyond that, and so forth, as mentioned above. So it is not the case that I do not also understand that tradition. At a later time, due to the kindness of having come into contact with the trilogy of Bodhisattva commentaries, I understood many profound and crucial points of Dharma that I had not understood well before. Now, if I think about the understanding I had at that time and the corresponding statements I made, I am simply mortified. According to Dolpopa, the process of enlightenment can be illuminated by some traditional examples. First, he accepts two types of universal ground, alaya, kunshi. Of these, he considers the Buddha nature or sugata essence to be the universal ground primordial awareness, kunshi yeshe. While still veiled by the temporary obscurations of the afflictions and of knowledge, this is like the sky filled with clouds or a jewel covered with mud. In contrast, the universal ground consciousness, alaya vijnana, kunshi namshe, is the impurities or incidental stains that are to be removed, and the deeply imprinted habitual propensities associated with it. These are like the clouds in the sky or the mud covering the jewel. Second, the path is composed of the various techniques of practice that remove the impurities. This path can be likened to the wind that scatters the clouds or the stream of water that washes the mud from the jewel. Finally, the result is described as an attainment, but is really unified bliss and emptiness, a self-arisen primordial awareness that is eternally present, but now manifests or actualizes. This is like the appearance of the clear cloudless sky or the jewel separated from the mud. Dolpopa says the incidental stains must be understood as empty of self-nature and suitable to be removed through meditation practice, while the Buddha nature itself is empty only of other extrinsic factors, such as the incidental stains that veil its eternal and indestructible nature. 2. A redefinition of Chittamatra and Madhyamaka. Dolpopa often signs his works with the pseudonym possessor of the four reliances. This clearly indicates his hermeneutical approach, referring to the four guidelines or points to be relied on, chatu pratisarana, that the Buddha prescribed in several Mahayana scriptures, such as the Sutra on the Four Reliances, Chatu Pratisarana Sutra, and the Sutra of Definitive Commentary on the Intention, Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra. These four key points are: rely on the teaching, not the teacher; rely on the meaning, not the text; rely on the definitive meaning, not the provisional meaning; rely on primordial awareness, not consciousness. Dolpopa strongly felt that the Buddhist tradition as it had developed in Tibet emphasized the teachings of provisional meaning at the expense of those of definitive meaning. For centuries, scholars had been concerned with resolving apparently conflicting notions about the meaning of emptiness, and in particular its relation to or identity with the Buddha nature. Many Tibetan experts believed the teachings of emptiness in the second turning of the Dharma wheel, such as the sutras on the perfection of wisdom, to be definitive in meaning, while the teachings of the Buddha nature in the third turning of the Dharma wheel, including a large number of Mahayana sutras and treatises such as Maitreya's Highest Continuum, were provisional in meaning. However, other traditions maintained just the opposite, that the teachings of the Buddha nature were definitive, and only by means of these could the true meaning of emptiness be understood. Mati Panchen, who is one of Dolpopa's chief disciples and Dharma heirs, gives a succinct definition of the Jonang position. The meaning of the middle wheel is the way in which the relative is empty. The meaning of the final wheel is the way in which the absolute is empty. Since these teach the non-existence of what does not exist, and the existence of what does exist, the ultimate intent of both is identical. According to Dolpopa, the first two turnings of the Dharma wheel that present the Four Noble Truths and the nature of emptiness as a lack of all defining characteristics do not emphasize the definitive teachings on ultimate truth. Specifically, the second turning primarily teaches that relative phenomena are empty of self-nature and do not transcend the chain of dependent origination. In contrast, the third turning of the Dharma wheel presents the teachings on the Buddha nature, or sugata essence, which are the final definitive statements on the nature of ultimate reality, the primordial ground, or basis beyond the chain of dependent origination, which is only empty of other relative phenomena. However, Dolpopa is also very careful to show that the nature of absolute reality taught in the sutras on the perfection of wisdom, which are included in the second turning of the Dharma wheel, and the teachings of the Buddha nature in the scriptures of the third turning are fundamentally in agreement, as are the traditions of Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Vasubandhu. Dolpopa emphasizes that the absolute emptiness taught in the second turning of the Dharma wheel, in the third turning, and in all the highest teachings of the Tantras is the profound emptiness of other, not that of a mere emptiness of self-nature. An integral part of his approach is to show that the different terminology found in a wide variety of Buddhist scriptures is often being used to make the same point. For example, in a text devoted primarily to clarifying the 9 fully established natures in the context of the three-nature, Tri-Svabhava theory, Dolpopa alternately refers to these as the 9 fully established natures, Parinishpana, the 9 perfections of wisdom, Prajnaparamita, and the 9 sugata essences, Sugata Garbha. Elsewhere, he further illustrates his point that such Dharma language is interchangeable by speaking of the 9 great seals, Mahamudra, the 9 great Madhyamakas, and the 9 absolutes that are empty of other, all of which describe the same profound ground of emptiness or profound true mode of reality. In opposition to the dominant tradition of interpretation in Tibet, Dolpopa maintains that Indian masters such as Asanga, Vasubandhu, Dignaga, and Nagarjuna are all representative of the tradition that he labels Great Madhyamaka, Uma Chenpo. Dolpopa considers one of the essential characteristics of this Great Madhyamaka to be the three-nature theory, Tri-Svabhava, that is almost always identified as a characteristic of the Yogacara or Chittamatra tradition. A significant Tibetan precedent for Dolpopa's point of view is brought to light by one of his successors, Kunka Drolchuk, who records some of the teachings of the 11th century master Tsen Kawoche, often thought to be the first Tibetan to have taught what later came to be known as the Shentong view. Kunka Drolchuk preserves these teachings under the title Guiding Instructions on the View of the Emptiness of Other, which he says have been condensed from the instruction manual of Tsen Kawoche himself. This short but very difficult passage is a fascinating glimpse into an early source for the Shentong view in Tibet. Themes found here can definitely be identified in the later work of Dolpopa, but his characteristic terminology, such as empty of other, Shentong, is absent. Attachment to confusing phenomena as true is the imagined. Attachment to incorrect conceptualization itself as actual objects and subjects is like mistaking a rope for a snake. As many phenomena as there are from form to omniscience, there are also that many imagined phenomena apprehended as this and that. If based on causes and conditions, these are the dependent, appearing in various forms, but are merely incorrect conceptualization, like the rope as the basis confused for a snake. Due to karma and the afflictions, there are such conceptualizations, from form to omniscience. The self-arisen true nature pervading the dependent from the beginning, like the space pervading the rope, is the unmistaken, fully established, the immutable, fully established, the two form kayas, the components of enlightenment, the truth of the path, and the phenomena from the form of true nature to omniscience. In the conventional sense, these are empty of the imagined characteristics. Though classified as three natures without essence, if examined, only the dependent phenomena and the fully established true nature have a single, taintless, and spontaneous true nature, because there are no objects and subjects other than mind. Therefore, the imagined is an emptiness of own essence, like the horn of a rabbit. The dependent is like an illusion, because it is empty of the imagined. The fully established is like the sky, because it is empty of both the imagined and the dependent. The distinctions of an imagined and a dependent exist in the relative, but do not exist in the absolute. The fully established true nature exists in the absolute, but is great Madhyamaka, free from all extremes, without any essence that is identical to or different than relative phenomena. The first important point to notice is that this teaching is structured according to the three-nature doctrine, usually associated with the Chittamatra or Yogacara tradition of the Mahayana, and not with the Madhyamaka. In particular, Tsen Kawoche says that the fully established nature is empty of both the imagined and the dependent natures. In this he is certainly following the description found in the vast explication, Brahatika, a large commentary to the three Mother Sutras, or Sutras on the Perfection of Wisdom, and not the orthodox Yogacara position as found in the works of Vasubandhu. Dolpopa would later do the same, and specifically point to the vast explication as the source for his position. The teachings of this commentary and their relation to Dolpopa's theories will be investigated more below. Like Tsen Kawoche, Dolpopa also refers to his teaching as Great Madhyamaka. He makes his case for this in the Fourth Council. In the flawed traditions of the Treta Yuga and later eons, it is claimed that the immutable, fully established nature is only Chittamatra. They allege that all three natures are also only Chittamatra. Because the three natures are repeatedly taught in the treatises of flawless Krita Yuga Madhyamaka, because that language does not occur in Chittamatra treatises, and because there are many refutations of that, it emerges from the Krita Yuga tradition that the three natures are the Dharma tradition of the Madhyamaka alone. Therefore, by not understanding and mixing up that type of classification, the dregs of the view have arisen. Those Madhyamaka treatises that present the three natures of the fully established and so forth have also been demoted to Chittamatra treatises. The great experts of Great Madhyamaka who taught those have also been demoted to Chittamatra adherents. The auto-commentary to the Fourth Council explains this section in considerable detail. There, Dolpopa notes that the three-nature theory occurs in many of the sutras that he considers Krita Yuga Madhyamaka, such as the Sutra on the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, the Sutra on the Perfection of Wisdom in 25,000 lines, the Sutra on the Perfection of Wisdom in 500 lines, the Lankavatara Sutra, the Sutra of Definitive Commentary on the Intention, Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra, and the Sutra of Excellent Golden Light, Suvarna Prabhasha Sutra. Furthermore, he maintains that texts where the term three natures occurs cannot be considered Chittamatra treatises because the immutable, fully established nature, parinishpana, and the philosophical tenets of the Chittamatra are in conflict. While the Chittamatra assert that momentary consciousness is truth in the absolute, Dolpopa contends that the immutable, fully established nature is absolute unconditioned space and pure awareness indivisible, which transcends momentary consciousness. Momentary consciousness is a conditioned, impermanent, fabricated, and incidental limited phenomenon, while the immutable, fully established nature is an unconditioned, permanent, natural, and primordial middle ground free from extremes. Thus, momentary consciousness cannot be equated to the immutable, fully established nature. As long as the phenomena of momentary consciousness are not transcended, there can be no non-dual primordial awareness, great Madhyamaka, or immutable, fully established nature. When the phenomena of momentary consciousness have been transcended, the immutable, fully established nature is attained. But at this point, the doctrine of Chittamatra has also been transcended. The immutable, fully established nature is thus Madhyamaka, not Chittamatra. Here, Dolpopa mentions that it is also necessary to understand the division of the Chittamatra according to the two truths. He maintains the existence of an absolute Chittamatra that can be considered identical to the Madhyamaka, because both say that in reality there are no phenomena other than absolute mind, and that absolute mind always exists as omnipresent, indestructible thusness. To say there are no phenomena other than the basic space of phenomena, Dharmadhatu, is equivalent to saying that there are no phenomena other than non-dual primordial awareness. Dolpopa identifies the relative Chittamatra with what was usually referred to as Chittamatra in Tibet during his time, and says this position should properly be termed Vijñanavada. The three-nature theory is one of the fundamental paradigms associated with the Yogacara or Chittamatra tradition of Indian Buddhism. It derives its authority from a number of scriptures, perhaps the most important of which are the Sutra of Definitive Commentary on the Intention and the Lankavatara Sutra. The theory was especially elaborated by Asanga in works such as the Bodhisattva Levels, Bodhisattva Bhumi, the Compendium of the Mahayana, Mahayana Sangraha, and distinguishing the middle and the extremes, Madhyanta Vibhaga. It is also taught by his brother Vasubandhu in the presentation of the three natures, Trisvabhava Nirdesha, and the 30 verses, Trimshika. The three-nature theory is considered an integral part of the Yogacara system, but Dolpopa points out that it is also found in some of the sutras on the perfection of wisdom. In Tibet, this fact had important hermeneutical implications for understanding the development of Indian Buddhist doctrine. In particular, the prevalent Tibetan view of the three turnings of the Dharma wheel was challenged by the presence of this theory in these specific sutras. It was generally accepted in Tibet that the scriptures and treatises of the Yogacara or Chittamatra tradition belonged to what was known as the third turning of the Dharma wheel, while those of the second turning of the Dharma wheel, such as the sutras on the perfection of wisdom, were associated with the Madhyamaka tradition. Here it is of particular significance that the vast explication, Brihatika, which is a commentary on the specific sutras on the perfection of wisdom where the three-nature theory are presented, has survived in Tibetan translation, and that Tibetan teachers have often attributed this commentary to Vasubandhu. The intense interest in the presence of the three natures in the sutras on the perfection of wisdom and in the interpretations found in the vast explication seems to have only arisen in Tibet. The presentation of the three-nature theory is found in the 25,000-line and the 18,000-line versions of the sutras on the perfection of wisdom. In each of these scriptures, the three natures are taught by the Buddha in response to questions from the Bodhisattva Maitreya. This occurs in the 72nd chapter of the 25,000-line version and the 83rd chapter of the 18,000-line version. It is surprising that no modern scholars have examined the section in the Tibetan translation of the vast explication, where the Maitreya chapter in the 25,000-line sutra is specifically explained. This work, which is the only extant text of Indian origin that comments on the controversial chapter, and which has often been attributed to Vasubandhu, is the obvious place to look for clarification of the three-nature theory found in the sutras on the perfection of wisdom. The vast explication is best known in Tibet by the short title, Destruction of Objections to the Three Mother Sutras. It is a commentary on the versions of the sutras on the perfection of wisdom in 18,000, 25,000, and 100,000 lines. Dolpopa emphasized that the vast explication is the work of Vasubandhu and gives it a place of central importance in his interpretation of these sutras. In the Nartang edition of the Tibetan canon, which was edited by Buton Rinchen Drup, the title page of the vast explication specifically says, composed by the master Vasubandhu. Buton rejected the opinion of some experts that it was the work of the Kashmiri master Domstrasena, but Tsongkhapa would later say it had been composed by this scholar. Ngorchen Kunga Sangpo, 1382-1456, representing the opinion of the Sakya tradition in Tibet, accepted the commentary as a work by Vasubandhu. Scholars of the ancient tradition of the Nyingma also accept it as an authentic work by Vasubandhu. In short, the only Tibetan scholars who did not accept it as a composition of Vasubandhu seem to have been followers of the Gelug tradition. The lineage of sutra interpretation maintained by Dolpopa's tradition in Tibet was eventually eclipsed by that of the Gelug in the early 15th century. Although not generally acknowledged, it is clear that much of Tsongkhapa's philosophical doctrine was formulated in direct reaction to the teachings of Dolpopa, which he had learned about during his studies of Mahayana treatises under the direction of some of Dolpopa's main disciples. Perhaps Tsongkhapa's unique attribution of the vast explication to Domstrasena instead of to Vasubandhu, as accepted by both Dolpopa and Buton, was part of his broader refutation of Dolpopa's teachings that had been so influential in the preceding generation. The Maitreya chapter is the primary location for the three-nature teaching in the 25,000-line and the 18,000-line sutras on the perfection of wisdom. But the three natures are mentioned throughout the vast explication, not just in the final section that specifically comments on this chapter in the 25,000-line sutra. A good example is found in a section of the text concerned with proving the nature of emptiness to be free from the two extremes. In explaining the intention of the Buddha in teaching that form is emptiness and emptiness is also form, the commentary says, concerning this statement, form is empty of form, there are also three aspects of form: imagined form, imputed form, and the form of the true nature. That which is the form of entities apprehended by childish, ordinary persons as characteristics suitable to be form, and so forth, is known as imagined form. Precisely that, in whatever aspect it becomes an object of consciousness appearing as an external entity, is known as imputed form. That which is free from the aspects of both the imagined and the imputed, and is solely the fully established thusness, is known as the form of the true nature. That which is the fully established, the form of the true nature, is empty of the characteristics of existence as imagined form and so forth, and also empty of form that appears in the aspect of an object imputed as form, so it is known as empty. Thus it is explained. But you may have doubts, wondering, does that which is the form of the true nature, empty of imagined and imputed form, have some other characteristic of form? Why is it even known as form? Therefore it is explained, that which is the emptiness of form is also not form. Precisely that which is empty of imagined and imputed form is the characteristic of the fully established. That form of the true nature is not the quintessence of form, because it is in all aspects isolated from the aspect of form. This section of the vast explication clearly says that the true nature or fully established nature is empty because it is free of both the imagined and imputed natures. Here are definite grounds for Dolpopa's declaration of absolute reality as empty only of other relative phenomena, in a manner very similar to this passage from the vast explication where the fully established parinishpanna nature is presented as empty of both the imagined, parikalpita, and the imputed, vikalpita, natures. Dolpopa says ultimate reality is empty of other relative phenomena, but not itself empty. For example, he claims that, if there were no fully established true nature, the imagined and the dependent would be impossible. One of Dolpopa's earliest major works, General Commentary on the Doctrine, contains the following verse: I bow at the feet of the masters who carefully distinguish all imagined and dependent phenomena are non-existent, but the fully established true nature is never non-existent, teaching what transcends existence and non-existence, and eternalism and nihilism. In his explanation of General Commentary on the Doctrine, Nya-Un Konga Pal specifically refers to Dolpopa's opinions several times when clarifying this verse. According to Dolpopa, the phenomena of the imagined nature are simply non-existent. The elements and so forth that appear to be external have no existence outside of the consciousness of the beholder, and are thus totally fictitious, like the horn of a rabbit. This is termed the authentic imagined nature. The concepts that arise in the mind in the wake of the appearance of apparent phenomena, and thus identify those phenomena as external, are termed the imagined nature existing in just the conventional sense. The dependent nature is also twofold. The impure dependent nature is all the ordinary worldly thoughts and mental states. The pure dependent nature is the conditioned primordial awareness that directly realizes selflessness and the worldly primordial awareness experienced outside of meditation sessions. These are dependent in nature because they arise from causes and conditions. The fully established nature is the ultimate reality that can withstand rigorous and reasoned examination from the perspective of the Absolute, and is empty of both the imagined and the dependent natures. In this way, all imagined and dependent phenomena are non-existent in reality, while the fully established nature is fully established in reality, is never non-existent as the true nature of phenomena, and always exists in truth. To say the first two natures exist in the Absolute is the extreme view of eternalism, and to say the third nature does not exist in the Absolute is the extreme view of nihilism. This fully established nature or absolute reality is the ultimate madhyamaka, or middle beyond those two extremes. Dolpopa consistently maintains that the three-nature theory belongs to the Madhyamaka tradition, not the Chittamatra. He was able to hold this position largely by claiming that Vasubandhu and Asanga were upholders of what was known as the Great Madhyamaka tradition, one of the key themes of which was a combination of the three-nature theory with standard Madhyamaka doctrine. Dolpopa's collected writings contain more than 2,000 pages of annotations and explanations concerning the different sutras on the perfection of wisdom. It is particularly interesting that large portions of his annotations to the 25,000-line and 18,000-line sutras are copied directly from the vast explication, although this text is not acknowledged as the source. At the end of such glosses, Dolpopa repeatedly adds, "Thus the Madhyamaka teaches." His interpretations of the three natures clearly follow the special teaching of the vast explication. Dolpopa also mentions the occurrence of the three-nature theory in still other versions of the sutras on the perfection of wisdom. He specifically refers to the sutras in 500, 8,000, 18,000, and 25,000 lines as teaching the three natures. The Maitreya chapter is found only in the 18,000-line and 25,000-line sutras. In citing the other versions, Dolpopa is referring to statements in the sutras that present the three-nature theory without actually using the three specific terms. For example, in the auto-commentary to the Fourth Council, he makes the following statement. Also, in the Sutra on the Perfection of Wisdom, in 500 lines, form and so forth that are non-existent are to be understood because they are imagined. Form and so forth that have an inferior existence are to be rejected because they are dependent. And because form and so forth that are existent in reality are fully established, they are precisely what are to be attained after removing the stains. In that way, those abiding in three categories are taught to be understood, rejected, and actualized after removing the stains. It is taught that if even the enlightenment of the Shravaka and the Pratyeka Buddha are not attained if you have not practiced in that way, what need is there to mention the enlightenment of the Mahayana? This reference clearly illustrates how Dolpopa interprets a passage of Scripture in order to highlight its significance in the context of his own philosophical agenda. Compare his interpretation to what is actually found at the very beginning of the Tibetan translation of the Sutra on the Perfection of Wisdom in 500 lines, which is the version he was using. The first words of the Buddha are, Subhuti, form is non-existent, it has an inferior existence, and it is existent. After saying the same threefold classification applies to the remaining aggregates, sensory bases, and so forth, the Buddha continues, in that way, childish ordinary persons do not perfectly and precisely comprehend form in the three categories, so they are conceptually attached to form, cultivate it, and obscure it. If certain renunciation will not occur by means of the vehicle of the Shravakas or the vehicle of the Pratyeka Buddhas for those who are thus conceptually attached to form, cultivate it, and obscure it, what need is there to mention that it will not occur by means of the great vehicle of the Mahayana? Now, the extent of Dolpopa's interpretation is obvious. The original sutra passage barely mentions the three categories, although they are clearly of fundamental importance in understanding the intent of the scripture. Dolpopa elaborates and sees them corresponding to the three aspects of the three-nature theory. Without examination of the numerous commentaries to the sutras on the perfection of wisdom in the Tibetan canon, it is uncertain whether he bases his interpretations on earlier Indian or Tibetan precedents, or whether this is another facet of his still largely unexplored and perhaps original hermeneutical work. Taranata, certainly Dolpopa's most influential heir, also emphasizes the presence of the three natures in the sutras on the perfection of wisdom, and quotes a large portion of the Maitreya chapter when later seeking to establish the canonical sources for the Madhyamaka, the emptiness of other, in his tradition. Dolpopa not only tries to show the compatibility of different Mahayana scriptures and treatises, but also wishes to illustrate how the same points of doctrine are expressed in the Vajrayana scriptures. In particular, he often explains the Kala Chakra Tantra according to the sutras on the perfection of wisdom, and vice versa. He points out that Nagarjuna presents the infallible teachings of the Madhyamaka by means of refuting the extreme of the nihilistic view of non-existence in his collection of eulogies and refuting the eternalistic view of existence in his collection of reasoning. Likewise, Asanga and Vasubandhu establish the meaning of the sutras on the perfection of wisdom as Madhyamaka by refuting the extreme view of existence through denying the reality of both the imagined and dependent natures, and refuting the extreme view of non-existence through affirming the reality of the profound and fully established nature. In this way, Dolpopa feels there is no contradiction between the teachings of Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Vasubandhu, nor are any of the flaws of the inferior Chittamatra doctrine present. Moreover, all the categories of pristine form and so on that are taught in the sutras on the perfection of wisdom are actually to be understood as indicating the divine assemblies described in the tantras. Dolpopa's consistent treatment of doctrinal topics of both sutra and tantra in the same works, and his insistence that these two traditions of explication and practice are actually saying the same thing, albeit with different terminology and style, is another area in which he departed from what was the norm in Tibetan scholarly discourse. Mahayana and Vajrayana theory and practice were more often the subjects of separate works and not discussed side by side. But Dolpopa felt the entire Buddhist tradition, as it had been received in Tibet, should be utilized when seeking to understand the true intent of the Buddha and his great successors. As he says in the auto-commentary to the Fourth Council, tantras should be understood by means of other tantras. Sutras should be understood by means of other sutras. Sutras should also be understood by means of tantras. Tantras should also be understood by means of sutras. Both should be understood by means of both, and furthermore by means of pristine learning, reflection, meditation, explication, and practice. Multiple profound grounds, paths, and results of multiple profound teachings are thereby realized. All the grounds and results of definitive meaning are one, as the sugata essence itself. The path is its yoga. 3. Two approaches to enlightenment. When it comes to the question of how enlightenment actually occurs, Dolpopa, like almost all Tibetan masters, teaches that the path described in the Buddhist Tantras is the superior way. However, it can be said that there are two basic views of how enlightenment comes about. The first view is that enlightenment occurs only when the vital winds, vayu, lung, that normally circulate in the right and left subtle channels within the human body are drawn into the central channel, avaduti, through the practice of yoga. The second view is that enlightenment is attained by simply recognizing the nature of your own mind, which is also often expressed as recognizing the essence of thoughts to be the Dharmakaya. Here, Dolpopa does not depart from the position of the founders of Sakya, the first of whom, Sachen Kunga Nyingpo, 1092 to 1158, told his disciple, Pakmodrupa Dorje Gyalpo, 1110 to 70, that birth in samsara occurs because the vital winds have not been drawn into the central channel of the subtle body. Dolpopa says absolute truth is accessible only to non-conceptual primordial awareness, not to relative consciousness. Moreover, absolute truth is not within reach while the vital winds have not ceased or entered the central channel, and only the relative is apparent while the breath still circulates. These comments explain why it is necessary to practice tantric yoga, especially the six-branch yoga, to realize the true nature of reality. For Dolpopa, the six-branch yoga that is the completion stage practice of the Kala Chakra Tantra is the most effective method for rapid attainment of enlightenment according to the tradition of Buddhist Tantra. The first of the six branches is individual withdrawal, pratyahara, which is practiced to sever the connection between the ordinary five sense organs and their five objects, thus withdrawing the projected consciousness from those objects. When this is accomplished, certain signs or images of emptiness, shunyata bimba, appear. According to Dolpopa, these are actual manifestations of the Buddha nature, or sugata essence. The second branch is mental stability, dhyana, during which the mind becomes stable and firmly fixed upon new points of reference, the images of emptiness. The third branch is breath control, pranayama. This branch is practiced to draw the vital winds into the central channel of the subtle body, thus gaining control of the energies of the body and quieting the movements of ordinary consciousness. The fourth branch is retention, dharana. The main purpose here is to prevent any movement of the vital winds and thereby perfect the retention of reproductive fluids. During the fifth branch, subsequent mindfulness, anusimriti, various yogas are practiced together with an actual or visualized consort. The meditations of fierce fire, chandali, tumo, are also included in this branch. The blazing appearances of fierce fire are a basis for the occurrence of the special images of emptiness that actually elicit the experience of immutable bliss and emptiness. The sixth and final branch is meditative concentration, samadhi. The practice during meditative concentration is not different than during subsequent mindfulness, but immutable bliss increases. A radical dematerialization of the physical body is actually accomplished, and the non-dual kaya of primordial awareness is achieved. According to tantric teachings, the ordinary vital action winds, karma vayu, are drawn into the central channel during the practice of yoga and transformed into the vital wind of primordial awareness, jnana vayu, yeshe lung. Until this is accomplished, the practitioner remains under the power of ordinary consciousness, which is mounted on the vital action winds. When these winds are drawn into the central channel and transformed into the vital wind of primordial awareness, this serves as the support for non-conceptual primordial awareness. Dolpopa clearly summarizes the key points of this approach to enlightenment. Therefore, as long as confusion has not ceased, it is impossible for confusing appearances, the cycle of birth and death, to cease. As long as this circulation of the breath has not stopped, it is impossible for this stream of consciousness to stop. While this stream of mind and mental events has not stopped, it is also impossible for this confusing appearance, the three realms, to stop. Therefore, with the wish to transcend the three realms, whose nature is suffering, if you abandon all distractions and meditate on the profound Vajra Yoga, the sublime nectar from the mouth of the excellent master, this circulation of vital winds and mind together will stop. Dolpopa strongly objects to the view that mere recognition of the nature of mind, or recognition of thoughts as the Dharmakaya, brings about enlightenment. As he says in the Fourth Council, I cannot yield to those who accept, Since Buddhahood is reached by recognizing your very essence, you do not need to accumulate the two assemblies and purify the two obscurations, because recognizing the very essence naturally purifies them without rejection. So joining my palms together, I offer advice and make an appeal. A sentient being without self-awareness is impossible, and if you have self-awareness, you have recognition of your very essence. If you were totally unaware of self and others, it would contradict being aware, like the gross elements. Therefore, all sentient beings have minds, and all who have minds have self-awareness, so they have recognition of their very essence as soon as they are born. This approach is known to those who understand Scripture and reasoning. Arrogant fools with little learning, who are usurpers, pretenders, and fabricators of Dharma, are numerous, but have never understood this approach, or even heard about or seen it. Therefore, such a wrong view in which recognizing your very essence is sufficient is the secret words of Mara. Reject such an evil view, the work of Mara, which says, you enter the perfect path or the wrong path through such realization or lack of realization. Therefore, you are liberated by recognizing your very essence. You might say, the meaning of recognizing your very essence refers to precisely the realization that this consciousness of your own mind is the Dharmakaya. Because this consciousness is the opposite of the Dharmakaya, it is never the Dharmakaya. The Tibetan controversies about instantaneous enlightenment through recognition of the nature of the mind have been studied by David Jackson. As he shows, it is mainly members of the Kagyu traditions in Tibet who have maintained this doctrine, although it is certainly common in Chinese Chan Buddhism and in the teachings of the Great Perfection in Tibet. Dolpopa quotes the position that is the object of his refutation. Recognizing the very essence naturally purifies them without rejection. This expresses the view that through recognition of the essence of the thoughts as the Dharmakaya, they are purified or dissolved into the Dharmakaya, and also the idea that any affliction that arises is actually a manifestation or self-presencing of primordial awareness itself. Thus, there is no need to reject thoughts or afflictions, which are naturally purified by means of the recognition. This type of viewpoint is widespread in Tibetan Buddhism. In contrast to these views, Dolpopa claims that the definition of an ordinary sentient being, or a Buddha, and of samsara or nirvana is determined by the presence or absence of the incidental and temporary obscurations that veil the true nature of reality. It is not determined solely by recognition of the nature of the mind or the thoughts. In a text of advice composed for the physician Tsoltrim Dolpopa writes at length about these problematic issues. Even if confusing appearances are realized to be just confusing appearances, as long as this circulation of the vital winds and mind has not ceased, this appearance of confusion will not cease. In a similar way, as long as the jaundice is not cured, the appearance of the conch shell as yellow will not cease. To stop the circulation of the vital winds and mind, the exceptional dharma of Shambhala to the north, the heartfelt advice of the Kalkis on the 10th level, the uncommon oral instruction of the sugata essence as Kala Chakra is required. Other minor instructions cannot stop it. When this circulation of the vital winds and mind has stopped, there is not merely an inanimate state or absolutely nothing. Just by abandoning all pervasive thoughts, a spontaneous, non-conceptual, primordial awareness beyond the phenomena of consciousness transforms into the mode of great non-dual primordial awareness. Just by curing jaundice, the white conch shell is seen as it is. Or just by breaking a vase, the lamp flame present inside it is seen. Or just by the clouds clearing in the sky, the planets and stars are seen. It is similar to that. But if such an understanding is rare even among Dharma practitioners, and rare even among dedicated meditators, what need is there to even mention what it is among other people? The inconceivable luminous Great Seal, the 4 kayas, and the 5 types of primordial awareness are taught in authentic sutras and tantras to be always present in the hearts of all sentient beings. This corresponds to the truth, but those who have not penetrated the core of those scriptures exaggerate by saying, all apparent existence is the Great Seal, the 4 kayas, and the 5 types of primordial awareness. He again picks up the same topic later in the text. While the ground Buddhahood of the Dharmakaya and the resultant Buddhahood of the Dharmakaya have not the slightest difference in essence, they are distinguished as ground and result by means of the presence or absence of incidental stains. This is like referring to the space of the sky in situations when it is free or is not free of clouds, and so forth. Buddha is taught to be the kaya of primordial awareness, and the incidental impurities are taught to be the groups of consciousness. In that way, primordial awareness and consciousness are taught to be extremely different, like light and dark, or nectar and poison. Nevertheless, the differentiation of those two is very rare. These days the majority maintains that precisely this mind nature is the Dharmakaya, self-arisen primordial awareness, and the Great Seal, and many maintain that thoughts are the Dharmakaya, the afflictions are primordial awareness, samsara and nirvana are indivisible, these appearances and sounds are the three kayas, or the four kayas, and so forth. And he concludes with the following advice. Seek out an uncommon esoteric instruction such as that which separates natural luminosity and the incidental stains like separating clear water and sediment. Without it, this incidental mind and deceptive mental events will be taken to be the kayas, primordial awareness, and so forth, which is like taking poison to be medicine or taking brass to be gold. It will be maintained, if this deceptive, impure mind is recognized, it is Buddha, but if it is not recognized, it is samsara. If it is recognized, it is primordial awareness, but if it is not recognized, it is ignorance, and so forth, which does not agree with the words of the Buddha and also contradicts reasoning. For example, that is like maintaining, if this fire is recognized, it is cool, but if it is not recognized, it is hot, or maintaining, if this deadly poison is recognized, it is nectar, but if it is not recognized, it is poison, or maintaining, if this great abyss is recognized, it is a pleasant plain, but if it is not recognized, it is a great abyss, or maintaining, if this razor is recognized, it cannot cut the body, but if it is not recognized, it can cut, and so forth. For Dolpopa, appearances cannot be the manifestation or self-presencing of primordial awareness or the Dharmakaya because ordinary appearances are imaginary and dependent phenomena, which are both actually non-existent. The fully established true nature, non-dual primordial awareness, the Dharmakaya, and so forth are real and existent. Ordinary sentient beings spend their lives occupied with non-existent phenomena, asleep to the reality of the true nature within each of them. Enlightenment is achieved only when the incidental obscurations are removed through the practice of the path, and the eternally present ground of emptiness, the Buddha nature, is allowed to shine forth as the awakened result. Dolpopa in these quotations mentions several times that ordinary consciousness is the opposite of the Dharmakaya, or is extremely different than primordial awareness. This is because consciousness in all its varieties is only relative and empty of self-nature, while the Dharmakaya and non-dual primordial awareness are empty only of other relative phenomena. These are two great and separate kingdoms, and the objects of these two different states of perception are samsara and nirvana, which are indivisible only in the sense that the first, which is actually non-existent, could not appear without the presence of the second, which is truly existent. As Kalki Pundarika says, existence and nirvana are not identical, but like a shadow and the sun.